Jessica Swartz, Michigan's 4th District Democratic Congressional candidate. Thanks for being with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for being here, Bob.
Why are you running today?
Honestly, this has been something I've always been called to do. I see it as my way of serving our country. At the end of the day, I'm in it to be able to help people. I want to use my voice to speak for everybody. I feel like right now, only a small portion of us in this district are being represented in Washington, and the rest of us deserve a voice. So I want to use my voice to do that.
The Michigan legislative races, the congressional races, the presidential races getting so much attention this year because it is a key swing state. How is that impacting your race?
Obviously it is getting a lot of attention. Here being from West Michigan, we're kind of used to the east side of the state getting a lot more of that attention. But what we really need to keep in mind here in this district and what I frequently tell people, both in state and out of state, is this is a brand new district. We were redistricted in 2022. So Congressman Heisinger has only been in this seat for 2 years. And in fact, all of your viewing area was Congressman Upton's district. And so we are, this is a very competitive race. And having that attention on the state does help us.
What is your experience that makes you believe you'll be a good congressperson?
I am a public interest attorney. So I have dedicated most of my career to helping people. I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, so I have been a federal employee. I understand what it takes to apply the laws, not just read them and review them. Also, as an education attorney, again, looking at how the laws affect real people. And I think as an attorney, in addition to the ability to read and write and understand the laws, which is important in those who are writing the laws for us, it has taught how to look at both sides of an argument. It's taught me how to gather the facts and to be empathetic without being emotional. And I think, those skills are something that is missing from a lot of people in Congress. And I would like to bring those back.
Many of the topics that are going to decide this race will also decide other races and the presidential race. And we're talking about the big ones like the economy, immigration, some of those sorts of issues. Abortion will be a central topic as well, especially in a state like Michigan that recently put abortion protections into the state constitution. What is the top of your list? What is the driving reason why you are involved in this race?
Well, there's three main issues that I'm working on, and that I've heard from folks as I'm crisscrossing the district in all six of our counties and talking to people. The first one, it really is the cost of living. People are feeling the hurt at the gas station, at the grocery store, with their rent, with their prescription costs. Those are things that we really need to take a look at. And none of those are a black and white issue. None of them have a simple solution. They're all going to require strong bipartisan decision making. And our current congressperson doesn't, appear to be inclined to do any of those things. He's called himself the most conservative member of Congress for Michigan. And so that's one. People are hurting. The second one is protecting Lake Michigan. Growing up here in West Michigan, I spent summers on the lake. It's my favorite place to be, of all the places that I have been. And it's changing. In my lifetime, it has changed. It has gotten warmer. We've got invasive species. And we have, thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on Lake Michigan. And so we need to make sure that we're doing what we can to protect it. And then finally, like you mentioned, is continuing to fight for women's reproductive health rights. Yes, we have a constitutional amendment in Michigan, but even after that passed here in our district, a majority of the people in this district voted for it. Congressman Heisinger sponsored a national abortion ban that goes against the people in his own district, that would void our state constitution. A lot of people miss that point. And his position on this is so extreme. That bill has no exceptions for rape, incest, or life of the mother. He has failed to put his support behind a bill that would protect access to IVF or protect access to contraception. He voted against protecting access to contraception for veterans. So, we need to really get that word out to people that while it seems settled here in Michigan, it really, if the Congress takes it up, it is not going to be settled here in Michigan anymore.
Let's talk about some of those issues. We'll start with the economy. Both parties really agree that there needs to be something that's done to bring down the cost of everyday items like gasoline and milk and eggs and rent that people pay, et cetera. In a free market system, what specifically can Congress do to bring about some of that relief?
Well, some of the things I think they can do is, take a look at the cost of healthcare. They got a good start in negotiating some of the prices of drugs with Medicare, which, by the way, Congressman Heisinger voted against. We can expand that. One of the things that we can do here locally is so Congressman Heisinger is the only person in the Michigan delegation on either side of the aisle who votes no, doesn't take community project funding, which is money that has already been allocated for local work. And that's something that as a congressperson, I could bring back to the community here and that we could use for housing. We could use for helping, in addition to the cost of living, community mental health services. You can't work if you are having a hard time just getting up in the morning. And so those are different things I think that we could do at the federal level that could really help.
Those are things that could put essentially more money into people's pocket, but that doesn't necessarily bring down the price of eggs or bring down the price of milk and gas. And Vice President Harris talked about the issue of going after price gougers. And most of the economists who looked at that said, well, while in some cases that can be an issue, we most notably heard about the CEO of Kroger, well, perhaps not the CEO, but a senior vice president in charge of pricing, acknowledging that there was some level of that intentional overinflation, if you want to call it, for the price of eggs and milk and things like that. But it's negligible at best, according to the most economists. What else beyond that can happen at the federal government level to bring down those prices of everyday items, whether people have more expendable income or not?
Well, you made a good point about the price gouging and what the economists are saying. We could focus more on taking a look at antitrust. The government under President Biden has started doing that, looking at companies who are colluding on the prices, and that's something that we could do. And we could also, putting tariffs on things is not going to help. That is going to raise prices here. So we need to make sure that we still have a good global economy, good global exchange, that we are also producing things here at home. So we're not, paying to ship them halfway around the world. Cutting that cost out of things would also help lower the prices.
Some of the economists also looked at that issue of tariffs that former President Trump is proposing, and he's talking about a little bit more of a blanket approach, specifically against China. And when there were more targeted tariff approaches in previous administrations, both his and others, most of the economists said that generally it did not see significant increase for the cost of the average person, in not all cases, but in some cases. Do you feel like that a targeted approach in tariffs might be a tool in a shed that perhaps a legislator or a president needs to have to make sure that there's a level playing field?
Well, I'm not an economist. And so this is one of those areas where I would commit to speaking to experts on both sides. I will listen to any reasonable position and gather as much information as I can get to make the best decision I can for our district and for our country. And so that really is what I can give the voters at this point, along with the promise that I will educate myself on this issue and make, again, the best decision I can.
Let's talk about another one of the issues. You talked about reproductive rights or abortion. Michigan currently doesn't really have any restrictions right now with its current abortion law that was passed through this the ballot proposal. So the people voted on this. But essentially, there is no restriction on abortion from inception all the way up to the time of birth. Should there be, there should be limitations on abortion when a woman can have an abortion?
Well, just as an initial matter, there are still some restrictions in Michigan, but that's beyond the point. The issue here to me is the government shouldn't be involved in this. This is a decision between a woman, her healthcare provider, and her God if she has one. And if her healthcare provider wants to place some restrictions on that individual, that's up to the healthcare provider. It is not a place where the government and politicians should be involved at all.
Medicaid currently only pays for abortion in limited circumstances, and that would be typically like a rape or incest or for the life of the mother. Should that be expanded? Should it cover essentially any abortion?
I would say this is an issue I need to think more about. But again, I'm going to default back to the healthcare provider. If the healthcare provider says that this is necessary for the health of the mother, and it could be more than physical health, it could be mental health, it could be financial health, then that is something that I believe that we should cover. Yes.
Let's talk about immigration. What is the best way in your mind to handle immigration, illegal immigration specifically, not legal immigration, but illegal immigration?
Mhm. This is a bipartisan problem that requires a bipartisan solution. Congress, regardless of who's in charge, has been kicking this can down the road for decades. And it's something that we absolutely must take a look at. The bill that was in the Senate had some very good solutions in it. We can't, it's not a single road solution here. We need to look at what's happening on the border, but we also need to look at our system. We need to make sure that it's not taking 10, 15 years for people to work through the system. People who have legitimate claims to be here should be allowed to be here. People who don't shouldn't, and it shouldn't, like I said, take 10 years to do that. There was a solution, and the extremist Republicans, like my opponent, decided it was more important to play politics with individuals' lives, both the immigrants and the people, the current Americans living in these places, than have this solution. And that's something that just can't happen.
When you mentioned people who have a legitimate reason to be here, and it could be people who are fleeing the idea of violence in their home communities or their home countries or whatever the case may be. But if they enter the country illegally, if they cross a border, if they swim across a river or something like that, what should happen with that person? Should that person be allowed to stay, or should that person be sent back to their home country, or at the very least to Mexico until that case can be processed?
We need to remember that these are human beings that are coming here at great personal, physical, financial um, health or strife for themselves. Anybody who has decided they want to walk 2,000 miles with their child in their arms deserves to be treated with some compassion. And so I would say that's the first step, is to make sure we are treating them with compassion. And then once we do that, then we'll take a deeper look at what needs to happen next.
Some of the border states, specifically like Texas and Arizona, have done these flights or bus loads of migrants into larger cities. And they've done it, you can argue, for very political reasons, and that is to try to shine a light on some of the issues that they're also facing themselves, and maybe scoring political points at the same time. But in the interim, the real world impact on places like Chicago and New York and some of the larger cities where this is happening, and other areas, is that they're overrun with social services. In some cases, New York had to close down some public schools to house some of these migrants who showed up really unexpectedly. Is that fair for those communities to be able to ask to handle the influx of really a crush of undocumented migrants that happened during the Biden-Harris administration?
Certainly we need to support the border towns and the border agents and those sort of people. I mean, they absolutely need our support in the best way to handle these. I don't believe that busing people across the country after they've already come thousands of miles is the most humane way to handle these. But again, that's something, there is no silver bullet for this. This is something that is going to require hard work from all parties, both sides of the aisle. And it's going to require hard work from people who are not going to play politics with people's lives, who are going to be able to set aside their egos and really look at this as human beings and how best to serve our districts where the people are coming, our country, but also these other human beings who are escaping horrible things and coming to America with a dream of a better place.
Nearly every Republican on the issue of abortion, excuse me, on immigration, and even some Democrats will say we need to strengthen the border. Do you agree that we need to strengthen the border? And if so, what would that look like for you? Does that include a wall? What would that look like?
No, I don't. I mean, I think all the evidence has shown that a wall is not gonna stop things. I mean, we've got a massive border. We've got two massive borders, and putting a wall over, a couple thousand miles isn't going to stop it. People are just going to go different places. We need to make sure the processing at the border is faster, clearer, cleaner, so that people are, incentivized to come in legally through the system rather than trying to get around it. I know that part of what they were trying to do was have appointments so people could actually come in and talk to folks. But the only way that a system like that is going to work is, again, if people are not forced to wait years and years to talk to somebody. So, in addition to providing support for the INS agents, excuse me, we need to put more finances into the system so people can get processed more quickly, which will then make them more likely to try to do this the legal way.
One more question on abortion. I'm sorry, I keep saying abortion, on immigration here. And that's specifically the question that has been around for a long time. What does the United States do right now with an estimated 11 million migrants who are in the country illegally, undocumented, if you'd like to use that term, about two-thirds of them having been here for at least 10 years. In some cases, it's been a generation. We've seen the parents come and they've had children, and sometimes those children have had children, and none of them are quote unquote documented. What do we happen with those people whose only crime is to come into the country illegally, but otherwise lived, for lack of a better term, a lawful life?
Yeah, I mean, that is an extremely difficult question, and one that I don't think I can answer in 30 seconds or anything like that. People have been productive members of society, and many of these people are working jobs that, the Americans who are already here don't want to work. I waited tables. We had folks in the kitchen who, other folks didn't want those jobs, and they were working hard and they were paying taxes and they were being contributing members of our society. My family were immigrants here. I'm gonna, assume yours were. We are an immigrant country unless you're Native American, and we need to find a way to integrate them into our country and into our society, but in a smart way. That is not going to overload the border cities.
Should there be any level of penalty, for lack of a better term, for those people who find themselves having lived here and maybe their children know nothing but the United States, similar to the DACA program, where they're not necessarily deported, but there has to be something that brings them into the fold in a way that is fair for the people who did go through the system correctly?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the children, the people who are born here, you're an American citizen when you get born here. So I do support the DACA program it just seems cruel to me to pick somebody up from the only life they know and drop them somewhere else with a language they don't know and a system they don't know. At the same time, I'm a lawyer. I support following the law. And we need to do that, but I think it needs to be an individualized assessment to see, what happened, how did they get there? I mean, we know that American citizens can, commit many more crimes than the immigrants do, and we need to make sure that, again, it's an individualized assessment on what to do with those folks.
Let me ask you, you mentioned crime, and I'll ask you about crime, not necessarily immigrant crime, but just crime in general. Are there too many guns on the streets
Yes.
of all
I mean,
sorts?
that's the answer to me. Yes, there are too many guns on the streets.
So what do you do about
Um,
that?
Yeah, I support common sense gun reform, like what Governor Whitmer in the Michigan legislature was able to pass. We're from Michigan here, where we are. I am related to hunters. I know many hunters. Nobody's coming after anybody's hunting rifles. That's tradition here, and that's not going to go anywhere. But semi-automatic weapons do not need to be in the hands of kids. Gun deaths is the number one cause of death for kids in the United States, and that is not acceptable. So we need to lock up the guns. We need to make sure that there are reasonable checks. We need to make sure the loopholes are closed, and we need to make sure there's mental health supports for people who are facing very tough times in their life, so they don't need to turn to gun violence in those situations.
Do you feel as though there is a place here to perhaps grab people's guns, take people's guns? There's this discussion they're trying to get the guns, and if you believe there are too many guns on the streets, how do you address the number of guns on the streets without taking some off the streets?
Well, we know there's responsible gun owners, and those responsible gun owners should not be penalized for that. I think again, it's the getting the illegal guns off the street. Gun shows, allowing straw purchasers. Those are the areas that we can really clean up first. Let's get the low-hanging fruit on this. And then once we clean those areas, then we can have the philosophical discussion of what to do about the other ones. But I really truly believe when we saw it here in the state that the majority of the people want common sense gun reform, and that's where we need to start.
You mentioned semi-automatic weapons in the hands of children. Should an AR-15, for just to pick one out at random, should anyone have an AR-15?
Honestly, I don't think so. Military, police officers, those folks. I think again, people are entitled to hunt. People are entitled to protect their homes. Unless and until we as a society can show that having those in our society is not doing more harm than good, then yeah, I think there should be some restrictions on those.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about foreign policy. The United States right now has, over the history of the formation of Israel, has generally given blanket approval to whatever Israel needs. There's been a little bit of back and forth recently with the ongoing war in Gaza that everyone would acknowledge that Hamas started, but the level of response is what's now being debated in Congress. Do you find yourself like some who would say, Israel was attacked, it needs to do whatever it needs to do to defend itself and make sure this doesn't happen again? Or do you find yourself like some members of the Democratic Party who say the level of response is starting to get overboard and maybe perhaps the United States should start to throttle back some of its support?
I do believe that Israel has a right to defend itself. They were attacked. They continue to be attacked, and they should have the defenses to prevent those bombs from hitting their towns and their cities and their villages and killing more civilians. I also believe that there are too many civilians being injured in this. And so I fully support a two-state solution. The only way we're going to get to that point is for there to be a ceasefire. Nobody has an incentive to come to a table if they are being fired upon. That at the end of the day, again, these are civilians that are being injured. These are civilians that are being killed. We need to honor our existing treaties. We've got those agreements with Israel, but I would want to take a closer look at any sort of expansion.
When you have a two-state solution, that would essentially mean that two states are willing to live next door to each other, and you would have to have some level of negotiation. When one side, Hamas, has clearly said over its negotiating both publicly and privately, at least privately from what we read in reports, but also what they've said publicly, that Israel should not exist. That's kind of a non-starter for Israel, I would think. How do you reach that point when you have one side not willing to negotiate the legitimacy of the other side?
That's a very valid question. I also think there are people in Israel who think that Palestine shouldn't exist. And so what we need to do is we need to find
But that's not the official stance of the Israeli
The
government
Israeli
versus
government.
the
Yeah.
Hamas. Hamas is the government in Palestine. That is the
Mhm.
only negotiating person you can go to is for Palestine is Hamas.
Mhm. No, I mean, I think that's a very valid point, and one that, we need to look more into. And again, I'm going to go back to I'm not a foreign policy expert in this. I think like many people in America, I am very quickly getting up to speed on what has been a very, very long dispute. And I continue to do that, and would again, seek as many positions as I can and to make the best decision that I can for as many people as we can.
And what about the issue of Ukraine? There has been when the war first started, when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, there was widespread support for the United States supporting Ukraine. The theory being, if we support Ukraine, American forces won't have to take up this fight with an expanding Russia and Vladimir Putin, essentially trying to resurrect the Soviet Union, for lack of a better term. So that has come back a little bit. The level of support in the Congress has not been the same level as it was a couple of years ago. Should it return to that level of we will support you in whichever way you need to be supported to stop Vladimir Putin from further expanding? Or do we need to say, this can't be a blank check?
I think anybody who has studied World War II knows that we need to help Ukraine stand up to this. Putin has demonstrated that he is going to continue taking over places unless and until he's stopped. At the same time, we need to make sure that any money or arms or support that we are sending is being spent correctly, that is being spent wisely. We need to make sure before we send all this money over there that the people who are receiving it are who they say they are. And so, it's kind of a yes and answer to your question of, yeah, we need to support them, and we need to make sure that the support is being used in the way that we intend it to be.
I'm going to wrap up here. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I appreciate your time on this.
Mhm.
But I do want to ask you a couple of presidential politics questions because sometimes the way questions are filtered through with presidential politics will kind of give some insight as the type of political philosophy a congressional candidate might have. On the Democratic side, we all saw what played out with President Biden stepping away from the race and Kamala Harris stepping into this race as the vice president. Do you support Kamala Harris because she's the best person for this job, the most viable person for this job, or do you support Kamala Harris because she's not Donald Trump?
I think she's the best person for the job. She has demonstrated to us that she's got the background. She's been the prosecutor. She appreciates the rule of law. At the same time, she's empathetic. She's also demonstrated that she's willing and open to learn. And as she learns more, she's willing to change her mind. And to me, that shows true leadership, of being able to say, look, I've got more information now than I had before, and I was wrong, and this is the best way for the country rather than digging in our heels, because it might be embarrassing later on. So, no, I believe that she's got the best interests of our country at heart, and will serve us much better in the next 4 years than Donald Trump ever could.
Does it give you a little pause to know that she didn't go through the primary process when she did 4 years ago? And we're not comparing necessarily 4 years ago to today, but that is the last time she was a presidential candidate, and she was the first one out of the race, of a multi-person race. And this time she essentially inherited this position as the candidate, as the nominee. Does that give you any pause?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think that's a valid point. Again, as someone who believes in the system, and democratic small d and capital D values, yeah, it gives me some pause. But I think the situation here warranted it. We needed to move forward quickly. I think the fact that so many people coalesced around her demonstrates that she was the right choice for us. And I mean, in an ideal world, yes, it would have happened, 8 months ago, and there'd be a full primary and all of that. But we don't get to choose the situation. We don't get to choose the world. And I think this is the best outcome that we could have had in the situation.
And final question, do you have any concerns about election security?
No, I have been a poll worker. I worked both the midterm and presidential elections from 2016 all the way through this Michigan's presidential primary this year. I have done much in Michigan to increase voting rights, voting access. I also worked the election protection hotline for the ACLU during the 2020 election. I have zero concerns in Michigan about how these elections are run. And if, I can walk somebody through the process from start to end if they want to. I can't speak to any other states, but in Michigan, I have absolutely no doubts that the election is safe and secure.
I'll give you the last minute to say why you believe you're the best candidate.
Yeah, we have an incredibly diverse district here. We've got billionaires, we've got people who arrived in the country yesterday, we've got all races, colors, creeds, religions, we've got all socioeconomic backgrounds, and the people in this district deserve to have someone who understands those different backgrounds and is willing to fight for them and willing to listen to them, not somebody who makes $1 million a year at their second job. And so that's the person I want to be. And again, at the end of the day, what I can promise to the voters is I will listen to any reasonable position and I will take the information, make the best decision I can for the voters in our country, regardless of from what side of that aisle that decision comes from. And I am not confident that our current representative is willing to do that.
Do you describe yourself as more of a moderate Democrat or more of a left-leaning Democrat or a conservative Democrat?
I would call myself a moderate Democrat. I am, liberal on the social issues, but I also, at the end of the day, am a pragmatist. We need to get things done. Our country was founded on compromise, and that's the way we can move forward or find the things we can agree on and, make incremental change. And so that's what I would like to do.
Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the WSBT 22 YouTube channel.